What happens when two of Hollywood's most beloved stars sit down for what should be a friendly chat, but instead, everything spirals into one of the most uncomfortable moments in daytime television history? Jennifer Aniston and Kelly Clarkson have always been known for their warmth, their relatability, and their ability to connect with audiences. But on this particular day, something went terribly wrong. The cameras were rolling, the audience was packed, and what started as light banter quickly turned into a tense exchange that left everyone in the studio stunned. By the end of it, Jennifer Aniston was no longer on that stage, and the footage that leaked online has everyone asking the same question: what really happened between these two? Before we dive into every jaw-dropping detail of this clash, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us whose side you're on, because trust me, you're going to have an opinion on this one. The day began like any other taping of the Kelly Clarkson show. The studio audience filed in, excited to see Jennifer Aniston, America's sweetheart. Sitting down with Kelly Clarkson, the powerhouse vocalist turned beloved talk show host, the energy in the room was electric. People were buzzing about the possibility of hearing behind-the-scenes stories from friends, maybe some updates on Jennifer's latest projects, and of course, that signature chemistry that usually makes Kelly's interviews so enjoyable to watch. The producers had hyped this episode for weeks. Jennifer Aniston was not just any guest. She was a ratings magnet, someone whose presence alone could guarantee millions of viewers. Kelly's team had prepared a list of questions, some playful, some more introspective, all designed to make Jennifer feel comfortable while giving the audience something memorable. But from the moment Jennifer walked onto that stage, something felt different. Kelly greeted her with the usual hug, the kind of embrace that talk show hosts give to make their guests feel welcome. Jennifer smiled, waved to the audience, and took her seat on the couch. The applause died down, and Kelly launched into her opening remarks, talking about how much she admired Jennifer, how long she'd wanted to have her on the show, and how excited everyone was to hear what she had to say. Jennifer nodded politely, but there was a tension in her body language that the audience couldn't quite place yet. Her smile seemed just a little too tight, her posture just a little too stiff. Kelly, ever the professional, didn't let it throw her off. She dove into the first question, asking Jennifer about her morning routine, a softball designed to ease them both into the conversation. Jennifer answered, but her tone was clipped. She talked about waking up early, doing yoga, drinking celery juice, all the things people expect to hear from a health-conscious Hollywood actress, but there was no warmth in her delivery, no humor, no spark. Kelly tried to lighten the mood, joking about how she could never stick to a routine like that, how she was more of a coffee and chaos kind of person. The audience laughed, but Jennifer didn't. She just looked at Kelly with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Well, discipline is important if you want to maintain a certain standard." The words hung in the air for a moment, and Kelly's smile faltered just slightly. She brushed it off, moving on to the next question, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Kelly asked Jennifer about her recent work, specifically, a new project she'd been promoting. Jennifer's response was measured, almost robotic, as if she were reciting talking points she'd memorized. Kelly tried to dig deeper, asking what drew her to the role, what challenges she faced, what she hoped audiences would take away from it. But Jennifer's answers remained surface level, devoid of the personal touches that usually make interviews feel intimate. Kelly's enthusiasm began to wane, replaced by a creeping sense of frustration. She leaned forward, trying to connect, asking Jennifer if there was a particular scene that stood out to her, something that made her feel vulnerable or challenged. Jennifer paused, looked directly at Kelly, and said, "I don't really think vulnerability is something I need to perform for an audience." Kelly blinked, clearly taken aback, and the studio went quiet. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the playful banter they'd come to expect. This was something else entirely. Kelly, to her credit, tried to recover. She laughed a little too loudly and said something about how everyone has their own process, how she respected that. But Jennifer wasn't letting it go. She tilted her head slightly and said, "I think sometimes people confuse openness with oversharing. Not everyone needs to lay their entire life out for entertainment." The implication was clear, and Kelly's face flushed. She glanced at her producers off camera, her expression a mixture of confusion and irritation, but she pressed on, determined not to let the interview derail completely. Kelly shifted gears, trying to steer the conversation toward something lighter. She brought up Jennifer's iconic role on Friends, a topic that usually guarantees nostalgic warmth and audience engagement. She asked Jennifer what it was like revisiting that part of her life, whether she ever rewatched old episodes, whether she missed the camaraderie of the cast. Jennifer's response was cool, almost dismissive. She said she didn't really think about it much, that it was a long time ago, and that she preferred to focus on the present rather than dwell on the past. Kelly nodded, but her frustration was becoming more visible. She tried to pivot again, asking if there were any moments from that era that Jennifer wished she could relive. Any memories that still made her smile. Jennifer sighed, a long, exaggerated exhale, and said, "I think people need to understand that actors are not their characters. Just because I played someone on a TV show doesn't mean I owe anyone access to my personal memories." The tension in the studio was palpable now. Kelly's smile had completely disappeared, replaced by a look of barely concealed annoyance. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms, and said, "I'm just trying to have a conversation here, Jennifer. I'm not asking for anything unreasonable." Jennifer raised an eyebrow and replied, "Aren't you, though? Every question you've asked has been designed to get me to reveal something personal, something you can turn into a headline." Kelly's jaw tightened. She uncrossed her arms and leaned forward, her voice low but firm. "That's not fair, and you know it. I've been nothing but respectful." Jennifer laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Respectful? You've been prying since the moment I sat down." The audience was completely silent now, unsure of what they were witnessing. Kelly's producers were frantically gesturing from the sidelines, trying to signal for a commercial break, but Kelly waved them off. She wasn't done. She looked Jennifer straight in the eye and said, "I invite people onto this show to share their stories, to connect with the audience, to have a real conversation. If you didn't want to be here, why did you agree to come?" Jennifer's expression hardened. She stood up, smoothing out her outfit, and said, "Maybe I shouldn't have." Kelly stood up as well, her voice rising. "So that's it? You're just going to walk off?" Jennifer didn't answer. She turned toward the exit, and the cameras followed her every step. Kelly called after her, her voice echoing through the studio. "Jennifer, come on, let's talk about this." But Jennifer didn't look back. She walked off the stage, past the stunned audience, and disappeared through the backstage curtain. Kelly stood there, frozen, her chest rising and falling as she tried to process what had just happened. The audience didn't know whether to applaud, to stay silent, or to leave. The producers finally cut to commercial, and the studio erupted into whispers. What had started as a routine interview had turned into a full-blown confrontation, and nobody could quite believe what they'd just witnessed. When the cameras cut back on, Kelly was still standing in the middle of the stage, her hands on her hips, staring at the empty seat where Jennifer had been just moments before. The audience was a mixture of shocked faces and nervous energy. People whispering to each other, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. Kelly took a deep breath, ran her hand through her hair, and turned to face the crowd. Her smile was gone, replaced by a raw, unfiltered expression that her viewers rarely saw. She wasn't the bubbly, effervescent host anymore. She was angry, confused, and trying desperately to hold it together for the sake of the show. She walked back to her chair, sat down heavily, and looked directly into the camera. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge to it that cut through the silence. "All right, so that just happened?" Kelly said, letting out a breathless laugh that held no humor. "I don't even know what to say right now. I've done hundreds of interviews on this show, and I've never had someone walk off like that." She shook her head, her eyes glistening slightly, though whether from frustration or hurt, it was hard to tell. The audience remained quiet, hanging on her every word. Kelly continued, her voice growing stronger. "I want to be clear about something. I have nothing but respect for Jennifer Aniston. I've admired her work for years. I was genuinely excited to have her here today. But what just happened? That wasn't okay." She paused, collecting her thoughts, and then leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. "I ask questions because that's my job. I ask questions because people tune in to hear real conversations, not rehearsed sound bites. And if that makes me intrusive, if that makes me disrespectful, then I guess I'm guilty." The audience began to murmur in support, a few people clapping hesitantly. Kelly held up her hand, signaling for them to stop. No, she said firmly. "I don't want applause right now. I want to understand what went wrong." She looked off to the side, toward the backstage area where Jennifer had disappeared, and her expression softened slightly. I don't know if she's still back there. I don't know if she's already left the building. But if she can hear me, I just want to say this. I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. That was never my intention. But I also think you owe me, and this audience, an explanation. You don't just walk off a set without saying why. That's not professional, and it's not fair. The words hung in the air, heavy and charged. Kelly sat back in her chair, exhaling slowly, and for a moment, it seemed like the segment might end there, with Kelly addressing the situation head-on and moving forward. From the side of the stage, there was movement. The audience's attention shifted, heads turning in unison as Jennifer Aniston reappeared. She walked slowly back onto the stage, her expression unreadable, her arms crossed over her chest. The studio fell into absolute silence. Kelly's eyes widened, and she stood up immediately, her posture defensive but open. Jennifer stopped a few feet away from her, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The tension was suffocating. Finally, Jennifer broke the silence, her voice low and controlled. I came back because I think we need to finish this conversation. Kelly nodded slowly, gesturing toward the couch. Okay, she said. Let's talk. But Jennifer didn't sit down. She stayed standing, looking down at Kelly with an intensity that made everyone in the room uneasy. You want an explanation? Jennifer said, her tone sharp. Fine, here it is. I'm tired, Kelly. I'm tired of being picked apart every time I sit down for an interview. I'm tired of people digging into my personal life, my past relationships, my choices, as if I owe the world a detailed account of everything I've ever done. Kelly shook her head, her voice rising to match Jennifer's. I didn't ask you about any of that. I asked you about your work, about your morning routine, about friends. Those aren't invasive questions, Jennifer. Those are standard interview topics. Jennifer laughed bitterly. Standard, she repeated. Right, because nothing about this industry is standard anymore. Everything is content. Everything is a headline. And you're sitting here acting like you're just innocently trying to have a conversation. But we both know that's not true. Kelly's face flushed with anger. She took a step closer to Jennifer, her voice firm. What are you accusing me of? Doing my job. Trying to give my audience something engaging. I'm not a tabloid reporter, Jennifer. I'm not trying to ambush you. Jennifer's eyes flashed. Then why did every single one of your questions feel like a test? Why did it feel like you were waiting for me to slip up, to say something you could use? Kelly threw her hands up in frustration. Because that's not what I was doing. You're projecting, Jennifer. You're taking out whatever frustrations you have with the media, with Hollywood, with whatever, on me. And that's not fair. Jennifer stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. But the intensity only grew. You don't get to tell me what's fair. You have no idea what it's like to have every aspect of your life scrutinized for decades. You don't know what it's like to smile through interviews where people ask you the same tired questions over and over, expecting you to be grateful for the opportunity. Kelly's jaw clenched. You're right, she said quietly. I don't know what that's like, but I do know what it's like to work hard to build something from the ground up, and to have someone come onto my stage and treat me like I'm beneath them. The words hit Jennifer like a slap. Her expression shifted, a flicker of something almost vulnerable crossing her face before it hardened again. Is that what you think I'm doing? She asked, treating you like you're beneath me. Kelly didn't back down. That's exactly what it feels like. From the moment you sat down, you've been cold, dismissive, and condescending. And now you're standing here acting like I'm the villain. Jennifer's voice rose. Maybe because you are. Maybe because people like you make a living off people like me, and then act surprised when we push back. Kelly's eyes widened in disbelief. People like me? What does that even mean? Jennifer gestured broadly, her frustration boiling over. Talk show hosts, interviewers, media personalities, all of you. You act like you're our friends, like you care about us, but at the end of the day, we're just content for you. We're just a way to boost your ratings. Kelly's voice broke slightly as she responded. That is so unfair, Jennifer. I care about every single person who sits in that chair. I prepare for these interviews. I try to make people feel comfortable. And if that's not enough for you, then I'm sorry, but that's on you. Not me. Jennifer stared at her for a long moment, her chest rising and falling with each breath. The audience was completely captivated, unable to look away from the raw emotion unfolding in front of them. Finally, Jennifer spoke, her voice quieter but no less cutting. You want to know the truth, Kelly? The truth is, I didn't want to be here today. My publicist booked this months ago, and I couldn't get out of it. I came here out of obligation, not because I wanted to have some heartfelt chat with you. Kelly's face fell, the hurt evident in her eyes. Wow, she said softly. Okay, well, thanks for being honest, I guess. Jennifer looked away, her jaw tight. I'm just done pretending. I'm done smiling through things I don't want to do. Kelly nodded slowly, her voice thick with emotion. Then maybe you should have said that from the beginning. Maybe you should have been upfront, instead of making me feel like I did something wrong. Jennifer turned back to her, and for the first time there was a crack in her armor. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Maybe you're right. Kelly exhaled, the tension in her shoulders releasing slightly. So where does that leave us? Jennifer looked around the studio, at the cameras, at the audience, and then back at Kelly. I don't know, she admitted. Kelly nodded, her expression softening just a fraction. Well, I can't make you stay, and I'm not going to beg. But I will say this, if you walk off this stage again, that's how this ends. No closure, no resolution, just this messy, uncomfortable moment that everyone will remember. Jennifer hesitated, and the silence stretched on, unbearable in its weight. The entire studio held its breath, waiting to see what she would do next. Jennifer stood there, frozen in indecision, her eyes flickering between Kelly, the audience, and the cameras that were capturing every second of this unraveling moment. The weight of the silence was crushing, and you could see the internal battle playing out across her face. Kelly remained where she was, arms at her sides, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and defiance. She had laid everything bare, and now it was Jennifer's move. The audience barely dared to breathe, afraid that even the slightest sound might shatter. Whatever fragile possibility existed for this to end in anything other than disaster. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jennifer spoke, her voice hoarse and strained. I don't know how to do this anymore, she said, and the vulnerability in those words was startling. Kelly's expression shifted, the anger draining from her face, replaced by something closer to compassion. What do you mean? Kelly asked gently, taking a small step closer but being careful not to crowd her. Jennifer shook her head, her eyes glistening. This, she gestured vaguely at the set, at the cameras, at everything around them. All of it. Sitting down, answering questions, pretending like everything is fine when it's not. I've been doing this for so long, and somewhere along the way, I lost the ability to separate myself from the performance. Kelly nodded slowly, her voice soft. I get that. I really do. But shutting people out, pushing them away, that's not the answer either. You can't live your life treating everyone like they're out to get you. Jennifer's jaw tightened. But what if they are? What if every conversation, every interview, every interaction is just another opportunity for someone to take a piece of me and use it however they want? Kelly sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. Then you're going to spend the rest of your life alone and miserable. And that's a choice you're making, not something that's being done to you. The bluntness of Kelly's words seemed to hit Jennifer like cold water. She blinked, her mouth opening as if to argue, but nothing came out. Kelly pressed on, her voice growing more passionate. Look, I'm not saying you don't have reasons to be guarded. I'm sure you do. But I invited you here because I thought we could have a real conversation, not because I wanted to exploit you. And maybe that was naive of me. Maybe I should have known better. But I refuse to apologize for believing that people can still connect with each other honestly. Jennifer stared at her, and for the first time since the interview began, her defenses seemed to crack completely. Her voice was barely audible when she spoke. I don't know if I know how to do that anymore. Kelly's expression softened even further. Then maybe that's something you need to work on, she said quietly. But you can't blame everyone else for your walls. Jennifer looked down at her hands, her fingers twisting together nervously. The audience watched, transfixed, as this incredibly private moment played out in front of them. When Jennifer looked back up, her eyes were wet, though no tears had fallen. You're right, she said, and the admission seemed to take everything out of her. Kelly exhaled, relief flooding her features. Okay, she said. Okay, so what do we do now? Jennifer gave a shaky laugh. I have no idea. Kelly smiled slightly, the first genuine smile since the confrontation began. Well, we could start by sitting down and actually having a conversation. No games, no expectations, just two people talking. Would that be okay? Jennifer hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yeah, she said quietly. I think I can do that. They both moved back to the couch, the atmosphere in the studio shifting from tense to cautiously hopeful. The audience remained silent. Sensing that whatever was about to happen next was important, Kelly settled into her seat and looked at Jennifer with an openness that hadn't been there before. Tell me something real, she said. Not about a project, not about your routine, just something that matters to you right now. Jennifer took a deep breath, considering the question seriously. I'm scared, she said finally. Kelly's eyebrows raised slightly. Jennifer's voice was steady but raw. Of becoming irrelevant. Of being forgotten. Of realizing that everything I've worked for, everything I've built, doesn't actually mean anything in the long run. Kelly nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's a fear a lot of people can relate to, even if they're not in your position. Do you think that fear drives you, or does it hold you back? Jennifer considered this. Both, she admitted. It pushes me to keep working, to keep proving myself, but it also makes me paranoid. It makes me second-guess everyone's intentions, including my own. Kelly leaned forward. What would it look like if you let go of that fear, even just a little bit? Jennifer smiled sadly. I don't know if I can. It's been with me for so long, it feels like a part of who I am. Kelly's voice was gentle but firm. But it doesn't have to be. You get to decide who you are, Jennifer. Not the media, not the audience, not even your past. You. Jennifer's eyes searched Kelly's face, looking for any sign of judgment or manipulation, but finding only sincerity. How do you do it? She asked. How do you put yourself out there every day without being terrified that people will see through you? Kelly laughed softly. Who says, I'm not terrified? I am, every single day. But I decided a long time ago that connection matters more than protection. I'd rather risk getting hurt than live in a cage of my own making. Jennifer absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. That's brave, she said quietly. Kelly shook her head. It's not brave, it's just a choice. And it's one you can make too. The conversation continued. No longer an interview, but a genuine dialogue between two women grappling with vulnerability, fear, and the cost of living in the public eye. Jennifer talked about the pressure of maintaining an image, the loneliness of never knowing who to trust, the exhaustion of always being on guard. Kelly listened without interrupting, without trying to steer the conversation toward anything more palatable or entertaining. She just let Jennifer talk, and in that space, something shifted. The audience, which had been holding its collective breath, began to relax, sensing that the crisis had passed. This wasn't the interview anyone had expected, but it was something more valuable. It was honest. Jennifer's shoulders gradually loosened, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She wasn't performing anymore. She was just being, and the relief was visible on her face. Eventually, Kelly glanced at the time and realized they had gone well over their scheduled segment. She looked at Jennifer with a rueful smile. We've probably broken every rule of television by now, she said. Jennifer laughed, a real laugh this time, full and unguarded. Probably. Worth it though. Jennifer nodded. Yeah, she agreed. It was. They sat there for a moment longer, the weight of everything that had transpired settling between them. Then Kelly turned to the camera, her expression more serious. I don't know how much of this is going to make it to air, she said, and honestly, I don't care. What happened here today was messy and uncomfortable and real, and I think that matters more than a perfectly polished segment. She looked at Jennifer. Thank you for coming back, for being willing to push through the discomfort. Jennifer met her gaze. Thank you for not giving up on me. Kelly smiled warmly and then addressed the audience both in the studio and at home. Look, none of us are perfect. We all have our walls, our fears, our moments where we lash out or shut down. But the only way we get through any of it is by showing up, by being willing to be vulnerable even when it's terrifying, and by giving each other the grace to be human. She paused, letting the words sink in. So if you're watching this and you're thinking about a relationship that's strained, a conversation you've been avoiding, a fear that's been holding you back, maybe this is your sign to lean into it instead of running away. It won't be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. Jennifer nodded in agreement, her expression peaceful in a way it hadn't been all day. Kelly turned back to her. Anything you want to add? Jennifer thought for a moment, then spoke directly to the camera. Just that it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to be a work in progress, and it's okay to admit when you're struggling, even if you think you're supposed to have it all figured out. Kelly reached over and squeezed Jennifer's hand briefly, a gesture of solidarity and understanding. The audience began to applaud, softly at first, then building into something genuine and heartfelt. It wasn't the enthusiastic clapping of entertainment. It was the respectful acknowledgement of witnessing something deeply human. Kelly and Jennifer both stood, embracing briefly before Jennifer gave a small wave to the crowd and walked off the stage, this time with her head held high and a faint smile on her face. Kelly watched her go, then turned back to the camera one last time. "That's our show today, folks," she said, her voice warm but tired. "Thank you for sticking with us through all of that. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below telling us, have you ever had a conversation that completely changed the way you saw someone? I'd love to hear your stories. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.